I think this is what is known as, killing you softly with flowers. So I apologize. I apologize to the chair and to the panel and to the audience. I was, believe me, held up in a very tight traffic squeeze, but I had a meeting which didn't finish on time, so I'm really sorry. But I don't know if the parameters are 10 minutes, sir?
Yes.
10 minutes. All right. Well, about Indo-US relations, very often it is where we are and where are we intending to go. Implies a jointness now, which means more or less the narrative about Indo-US relations in most places, college campuses, business meetings, business houses meetings, business management school meetings, etc. The narrative is that India and United States are finding a lot more easier to do business with each other, both in politics and security, as well as in economics and commerce. There are difficulties, no doubt about that, but the approach and consequently the methodology by which we define or teach about what to study in the Indo-US relations has somewhat been transformed as well. So I'm saying implicitly that there has been a transformation of the ties that bind India and the United States, and it's going far beyond the words about sharing values of democracy, etc. I think there's more life has been breathed into that framework in terms of actually threshing out some of the very major pillars, I would say, that gird a nation's health and its foundations and its stability, as well as its intentions to move forward, either as a power, rising power, or a great power, whatever may be its intentions and aspirations. Now, what are these pillars? And I'm sure many of them are going to discuss this in more bigger detail. Being the first speaker, the second speaker. But I'm just going to sort of sketch a few of the ideas that I think are very valuable to try and understand what this jointness actually means. I think one of the things we need to think about is, what do nations care more about? What we often call as national interest or core interests are those that, those are the red lines. Nobody ever can be caught compromising on those core interests, and each nation defines it on its own. Do they have such a definition? We don't see that, and yet clearly some interests are binding the two together. So my submission is, look for some interests and see how those interests are articulated to see why these two guys are doing business with each other. One of the speakers just talked about business, and it's a very useful sort of stream to look at, because there's one issue about strategic partnership. Is it going to be a business partnership or a security partnership? And in both there are businesses involved. So how does one look at it then? Is it a business interest? If I say business interest, what does it mean? Does it just mean business as in commercial, trade, etc.? But trade in what? What kind of items are you buying? What type of conditions, etc.? So that's a good framework to think about. The second thing is, if there is a transformation, what were the issues that were there before this transformation? And three very main historical constructs, one of them being India's nuclear capability or India's nuclear program, and the other was, U.S. alliance with Pakistan and India's non-alignment. To put it very, very briefly, with no order at all, but I think these three used to dog our, and of course, market access and trade practices from the 80s. So from the 50s to the 80s to the 90s, we did have a number of, I would say, consequences of these, sort of points that I've traced. But that seemed to be somewhat mitigated when the Cold War ended and we saw Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton's interest in India, unfortunately, took 2 terms for him to come. But once it was caught, I hear that he's still doing a lot more India than United States. And sometimes it seems useful to remember that leadership is also the second framework, I would say, that would be of use to us to understand the pace and growth of Indo-US relations, even in terms of its deepening or intensifying. So one framework would be interest, which would be very natural. There would be, are we natural allies? Many questions it can throw up. So the frameworks are important, ladies and gentlemen, and I think that's one useful one to look at, leadership. And I'm not talking just style, is he wearing a power tie, etc., but really we're talking about two leaders stretching each other's arms across and, cutting or making an agreement which would then, be translated into official bureaucracies. So I think leaderships are important because bureaucracies and leadership together form a core of the decision making in both countries. They are democracies. The third framework is also to look at the politics of the age. I think the politics of the age, both internationally and nationally, countries have had to adjust to a non-bipolar, non-Cold War kind of place. And that didn't mean any end of history. It didn't mean any end of conflict. It meant something else. I mean, there was so much more that was happening now that seemingly we were actually not prepared for history being rewritten in several places. You know, it was not an end of history, it was a beginning in many places. And I would say some places it was overtaking us in such rapid strides that it was like a freight train, which was just, you know, great powerful forces, more than great powers, began to be the framework of understanding the global south, for example. The multitudes were speaking. Arab awakening, there's a fight, you know, demonstrations against Mr. Putin, and now Mr. Putin, of course, has reinvented his diplomatic skills and style. But definitely, I think that's another reason why you should think about geopolitics as well, because that also tells you whether the countries like India and the United States are being now moving in a multipolar world. Are they moving towards each other because of just interests or because they want to find some kind of entente cordiale, which is stopping short of an alliance, but could become an alliance if both parties did desire it. But if they don't, they would still have broad understanding. And that's a framework that will again explain to you why we are on the same page with them on Asia-Pacific strategy of the United States, which is called a pivot or rebalancing strategy, but we are not with them on their Middle East. And, you know, we have very severe and sort of, I would say, deep concerns about what they're doing in our neighborhood, which is Afghanistan, and of course the role of Pakistan. So, you know, the same framework can explain puzzles of this or the other. Then comes the framework of realists versus non-realists. As an academic, theory is important to us. I think there's, you know, so many more people who will be talking to you about that. But I would say again, do countries actually arrive or being called something, do they become that? That's the question we need to ask. If somebody says you're a rising power, do we want to believe that? Or we have our own narrative? And if you look at that, India says, you may call us what you like, but we are growing and we are going to be a voice. First we said that. Then we said we'll be non-aligned. You know, the early years of our foreign policy, we were a much stronger, I mean, we were playing a very big role in the Korean conflict. If you look at the international relations history and diplomatic history of the Indian, role in those, I think there's something there. But at the same time, when you look at a country which is now sitting in, amidst a multipolar world, where you have to have your stakes in order and stability. Do you want to rile things up? Do you want to change things? Or do you want to, you know, sort of shape? So what does this mean? I've got 2 minutes. Is that 2 minutes then?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, sir. So I think that's another framework. Then what about Indo-US relations? Well, let me quickly flag all these frameworks will teach you that we still have differences. But my sense is that we are, you know, the two countries have bet on each other, a strategic bet for the long haul. What do I mean by that? You know, there are short-term differences, and because we are transparent democracies to the extent possible, all our differences are aired in public. So it doesn't mean or should not mean to us that we don't really have an interest in cooperating with the United States, or that our interests are not converging. So we do have congruent interests in certain sectors like Asia Pacific. We may differ on Syria, but then you have an administration, Obama administration, which changed it. Then we have bilateral issues. So we have regional, bilateral, and global. And we want to harmonize these three layers that we would like to work with the United States. But I tend to see a very strong, deeper future for us, because it's a long-term relationship, and the short term, there will be differences and difficulties, and both will pursue slightly, you know, but they will be able to modify if you give them this time. And the other thing I want to conclude with, and that is, in the United States, there's a sense of despondency about this relationship. In India, too, there are many people who are saying this relationship has run its team and it's going through a rough patch is the best bet. There is no low-lying fruit in this relationship. You've got to work hard for it if you want to make it a success. There are some misperceptions, there are some dogged issues in nuclear laws, etc., etc., etc. But I think, given the kind of frameworks I've introduced, I would look at it much more positively. As a trajectory unfolds, I think in the 21st century, we are destined to do more business with each other in all sectors. Thank you very much.